I was the black sheep of the family. Until my parents decided my fortune belonged to everyone and then I. Hi, everyone. I guess I just need to get this off my chest because it's been bubbling under the surface for way too long. I'm Evelyn, but people who actually care about me call me Evie. For as long as I can remember, I've been the black sheep of my family. I know. It sounds dramatic, but trust me, there's no other way to describe it. Pennsylvania, I always felt like the odd one out in my family. My mom, Linda, is the textbook definition of a matriarch, controlling, critical, and somehow always right, even when she's not. My dad, Roger, isn't much better. He's passive to the point of invisibility, always backing up whatever my mom said, even if it didn't make sense. And then there were my siblings, Mark and Jessica. Mark, the golden boy, could do no wrong. Jess, the baby, could do anything she wanted, and my parents would just laugh it off. Me? I was the problem child. I was the one who asked too many questions, had unrealistic dreams, and apparently too much independence for my own good. My family's favorite pastime seemed to be pointing out everything I was doing wrong, from the clothes I wore to the friends I chose. But the worst part was how normal it felt for them to treat me like that. It was like I'd been cast as the villain in a play I didn't even audition for. There's this one memory that still stings. I was 13 and had spent weeks painting this mural on my bedroom wall. It was a mix of stars and abstract patterns, something that, at the time, felt like my soul spilled out onto the wall. My mom saw it and said, "Well, I guess we'll have to repaint this mess when you grow out of your little artist phase." Mark laughed. Jessica asked why I didn't just buy some posters like a normal kid. I wanted to cry, but instead, I said, "It's not a phase." My mom just sighed and walked away, like I wasn't worth arguing with. High school was worse. Mark was a football star. Jess was on the cheerleading squad. I was in the art club and worked part-time at a diner. My parents came to every one of Mark's games, threw him parties, and bragged about him to the neighbors. Jess got a new car for her 16th birthday, even though I'd been saving for years to buy my own. Meanwhile, I was lucky if they remembered to ask about my day. By the time I graduated, I knew I had to get out. My family's indifference had turned into outright hostility when I told them I wasn't going to college right away. I wanted to move to the city and figure out what I wanted, but to them, it was just another example of me wasting my potential. "You'll come crawling back," my mom said the night before I left. "And don't expect us to bail you out when you do." I didn't look back. Moving to Philadelphia was terrifying, but for the first time, I felt free. I crashed on couches, worked odd jobs, and eventually found stability as a waitress at this hole-in-the-wall diner. That's where I met Rachel. She was this loud, unapologetic bartender who could make anyone laugh. Rachel became my first real friend, the kind who saw me for who I was and actually liked me for it. For years, my family was just a ghost in the background of my life. I'd call on holidays out of obligation, and the conversations were always short and shallow. If they ever missed me, they didn't show it. But I was okay with that. I was building something of my own, even if it wasn't glamorous. Then, in my late 20s, things started to shift. I found my footing in the event planning world, thanks to a random gig I got through Rachel's friend. I poured everything into it. Long nights, tight budgets, and so much caffeine I thought my heart would explode. Eventually, I partnered with Nathan, who had a knack for logistics that balanced out my creative chaos. Together, we built a business that actually made money. A lot of it. But here's where things get weird. The moment my business started taking off, my family suddenly remembered I existed. It started with small things. A congratulatory text from Jess after she saw a photo of one of my events on Instagram. A voicemail from my mom saying she was proud of me for finally doing something with my life. I knew better than to get my hopes up, but a part of me, a small, stupid part, wanted to believe they were finally coming around. I was wrong. The warning signs were there. My mom asked me if I'd considered buying a house closer to home. Mark joked that I should sponsor his kids' little league team. Jess hinted at needing help with a down payment on her dream condo. It was all so subtle at first that I almost didn't notice. Almost. And that's where I'll leave it for now. Trust me, things are about to get a lot messy. By the time I hit my late 20s, I was in a groove. My event planning business with Nathan was growing steadily, and for the first time in my life, I felt genuinely proud of myself. I'd taken a leap, worked my ass off, and built something out of nothing. Rachel always joked that I'd somehow become a functional adult, which was her way of saying she didn't know how I pulled it off. Nathan and I made a great team. He was the numbers guy, the spreadsheet wizard who could turn chaos into order. I handled the creative side, designing unforgettable events that people couldn't stop talking about. We'd started small, organizing birthday parties and local charity galas, but word spread fast. Within a couple of years, we were doing high-profile weddings and corporate events for big-name clients. The money was good, better than I'd ever imagined, and for once, I didn't have to worry about making rent or skimping on groceries. That's when my family came sniffing around. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Jess started texting more often, asking about my business and complimenting my Instagram posts. Mark called me one afternoon, something he hadn't done in years, to catch up. He spent most of the conversation bragging about his job as a regional manager at some company I didn't care about, but he slipped in a few questions about my income. Then there was my mom. She began leaving voicemails about how she missed me and wished I'd visit more often. It was surreal, hearing her voice dripping with fake sweetness after years of icy indifference. I didn't trust it. Why would I? These were the same people who laughed at me, dismissed me, and practically pushed me out of the family. Still, there was a part of me, a stupid, naive part, that hoped maybe they'd changed. Maybe they'd finally seen me as more than a disappointment. So, against my better judgment, I let them back in, just a little. I agreed to meet up with Jess for lunch one day when she happened to be in Philly. She gushed about how proud she was of me, how she always knew I'd do something amazing. It felt nice, even if it rang hollow. But then she started complaining about how expensive her rent was and how she and her boyfriend were saving for a condo. She didn't outright ask me for anything, but the implication was there. I brushed it off, told her I wasn't in a position to help. Her smile faltered, and the conversation shifted to awkward small talk until we said our goodbyes. I tried to put it out of my mind, but the pattern continued. My mom called one evening to tell me how proud she was of my success, then segued into a rant about how my dad's medical bills were piling up. Mark sent me a message on Facebook, out of the blue, saying he wanted to talk business opportunities. Even my dad, who rarely spoke to me at all, called to suggest I buy a nice family vacation home that we could all use. It was exhausting. I started avoiding their calls, replying to texts with vague responses, and shutting down any conversation that hinted at money. But they were persistent. Every interaction felt like a test, a careful dance where they tried to coax something out of me without being too obvious. I wasn't stupid. I knew what they were doing, but the guilt started creeping in, a voice in the back of my head whispering that maybe I owed them something. Then, the breaking point came. It was my mom's birthday, and I'd been guilt-tripped into driving home for her party. Nathan told me I didn't have to go, that I could set boundaries, but I felt like I had to. So there I was, back in the same house that had never felt like home, surrounded by people who only seemed to notice me now that I was successful. The night started fine, awkward but manageable. My mom was in her element, playing the doting mother in front of her friends, while Mark and Jess acted like we'd been close siblings all along. But as the evening went on, the wine flowed, and the masks started slipping. It was Mark who brought it up, in the middle of dinner. You know, Evie, with all your success, it's only fair that you pitch in a little for the family. Mom and Dad have done so much for us, and it's time we give back. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. What are you talking about? Jess jumped in, her voice saccharine. He's just saying that with your income, it wouldn't hurt to help out a little. You know, maybe cover some of Dad's bills, or help Mom redo the kitchen. I looked at them, stunned. I've been busting my ass to get where I am, and now you're telling me it's my job to take care of everyone? Where was this energy when I was struggling to pay rent or eat? My mom cut in, her tone sharp. Evelyn, don't be selfish. Family supports family. Mark and Jess have done their part. It's time you step up. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Done their part? Are you kidding me? Mark got a free ride through college, and Jess is living off her boyfriend's money. Meanwhile, I had to claw my way up from nothing because none of you cared enough to help me. The room went silent. My dad stared at his plate, refusing to make eye contact. My mom's face was red with anger, and Mark and Jess looked like they'd just been called out in class. Finally, my mom spoke. "I don't know what's happened to you, Evelyn. You used to be such a sweet girl. Success has made you cold." I laughed, an ugly, bitter laugh. "No, Mom, you made me cold." And with that, I left. I grabbed my coat, walked out the door, and drove back to Philly, my hands shaking the whole way. That night, I decided I was done. Done with their guilt trips, their manipulations, and their toxic entitlement. If they wanted my money, they'd have to find another sucker. But I should have known it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After that disastrous birthday party, I resolved to cut my family out of my life completely. I blocked their numbers, ignored their emails, and stopped checking my social media messages. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Rachel, of course, cheered me on. "They've been leeching off your energy for years, Evie," she said one night over drinks. "It's about time you set some boundaries." And for a while, it worked. I threw myself into my business, working with Nathan to land even bigger clients. We were expanding faster than I'd ever dreamed, and I could finally afford luxuries I'd only fantasized about before. A new apartment in Rittenhouse Square, a car that didn't feel like it would fall apart on the highway, even a few spontaneous trips to clear my head. Life was finally good, until the letter arrived. It came in an unassuming white envelope with my parents' address scrawled on the front. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note from my mom, dripping with guilt and manipulation. "Evelyn, I don't know why you've shut us out, but I can only assume it's because of the misunderstanding at my birthday party. You need to understand that we only want what's best for the family, including you. We've always supported you in our own way, and it's hurtful that you don't see that. Your father and I are getting older, and things have been difficult financially. I hate to ask, but we could really use some help to keep the house. Please call me so we can talk this through like adults. Love, Mom." I crumpled the letter and tossed it in the trash. Like adults? That was rich, coming from the woman who'd spent most of my life treating me like I wasn't good enough. I wasn't falling for it, but the letters kept coming, and the guilt started to gnaw at me. What if they really were in trouble? What if my dad's health was worse than I realized? Rachel told me to burn the letters. Nathan told me to stay focused, but a part of me couldn't shake the doubt. Then came the bombshell. It was a Saturday morning, and I was at my favorite cafe when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. The message read, "Evie, it's Jess. We need to talk. It's important." I stared at the screen, torn between deleting the message and replying. Against my better judgment, I texted back, "What do you want?" Her response came quickly. "Meet me at the diner on 5th, noon. It's about Mom and Dad." I showed the message to Rachel, who immediately frowned. "Don't go," she said. "You know it's a trap." "I know," I replied, "but if I don't, it's just going to haunt me." So, I went. Jess was already there when I arrived, sipping a latte and looking annoyingly put together. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Evie," she said, standing up to hug me. I didn't return the gesture. "What do you want, Jess?" I asked, sitting down across from her. She sighed, her face twisting into an expression that was either genuine regret or an excellent performance. "Look, I know things have been tense between you and the family, but this is serious. Mom and Dad are in deep financial trouble. They're behind on the mortgage, and if they don't get help soon, they could lose the house." I crossed my arms. "And what does that have to do with me?" She gave me a pleading look. "You're the only one who can help them, Evie. Mark's got his own family to take care of, and I'm still trying to get on my feet. But you're doing so well. You could save the house and barely feel it." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You're unbelievable, Jess. Do you even hear yourself? After everything, you expect me to swoop in and save the day?" Her expression hardened. "This isn't about the past, Evie. This is about family. Or do you not care about that anymore?" That hit a nerve, and she knew it. I stood up, shaking with anger. "Family? Don't you dare lecture me about family. I've spent my whole life being the scapegoat for all of you. And now that I'm finally doing well, you think you're entitled to what I've built? Forget it, Jess. I'm done." I walked out before she could say another word, but the encounter left me rattled. I knew they wouldn't give up, but I wasn't prepared for how far they'd go. The next week, I got a call from my lawyer, Victoria. "Evie, we need to talk," she said, her tone serious. "I got a notice from your parents' attorney. They're suing you." My blood ran cold. "Suing me? For what?" She hesitated. "They're claiming that you owe them financial support under the doctrine of filial responsibility. It's a long shot, but they're arguing that since you're financially stable and they're not, you're obligated to help them." Victoria explained that some states have filial responsibility laws requiring adult children to financially support their parents if they are in financial distress and the child has the means. However, these laws are rarely enforced unless the parents can prove genuine need. Given my parents' spending habits and their history of living beyond their means, Victoria was confident we could argue that their situation wasn't the result of unavoidable hardship, but reckless choices. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "That's insane. They can't do that." "They can try," Victoria said grimly. "But don't worry, we'll fight this. Just be prepared. This could get ugly." Ugly didn't even begin to describe it. Over the next few weeks, I learned just how low my family was willing to go. They painted me as a heartless daughter who'd abandoned her aging parents in their time of need. Jess and Mark submitted affidavits detailing all the ways I'd supposedly taken advantage of the family over the years. The lies were outrageous, but they didn't care. They just wanted to break me. And for a moment, it almost worked. But then Rachel reminded me of something. I'd spent my whole life fighting for myself. I wasn't about to let them take me down now. So, I fought back. And as I dug deeper, I uncovered something that changed everything. A secret my family never wanted me to know. The lawsuit turned my world upside down. I was furious, humiliated, and, if I'm honest, terrified. The idea that my own family would go so far as to drag me to court felt surreal. I knew they didn't care about me, but I never thought they'd weaponize the law to bleed me dry. Victoria, my lawyer, was a godsend during this nightmare. She was sharp, strategic, and completely unflappable. After the initial shock wore off, she sat me down in her office and said, "Evie, you've got the resources and the evidence to fight this. But if they're willing to escalate this far, we need to be ready for anything." Anything turned out to be a lot uglier than I expected. As the court date approached, Jess and Mark turned their smear campaign up to 11. They posted on Facebook about how I'd abandoned my parents, conveniently leaving out the part where they'd spent decades tearing me down. Mark's post went viral in our hometown, with neighbors chiming in about how disappointing it was to see someone forget their roots. Jess even did an interview with a local paper, painting me as a cold-hearted workaholic who forgot where she came from. But the real kicker came when Victoria started digging into my parents' finances. We needed to prove they weren't as destitute as they claimed, and what she found made my blood boil. My parents weren't just struggling, they were drowning in debt. But it wasn't because of medical bills or bad luck. It was because of years of reckless spending. There were credit card statements showing extravagant purchases, luxury vacations, designer clothes, even a brand new SUV for Jess. They'd been living beyond their means for years, relying on Mark and Jess to bail them out until their funds ran dry. And now, they turned to me. The worst part? I found out that my parents had taken out a second mortgage on the house, the one they claimed was about to be foreclosed, and given part of the money to Mark to start a failed business. The rest? It had gone to fund Jessica's lifestyle. Victoria presented this evidence during a pre-trial hearing, and it was clear the judge wasn't impressed with my family's sob story. But instead of backing down, they doubled down. Mark and Jess started spreading rumors about me in the industry, claiming I'd built my business on shady deals and exploited workers. One client even canceled an event, citing concerns about my ethics. It was a low blow, and it stung, but Nathan and Rachel rallied around me. Nathan went full damage control mode, reaching out to clients and reassuring them of our integrity. Rachel, true to form, suggested we host a tell-all party to spill the tea on my family's lies. I almost considered it. But the real turning point came when Victoria uncovered something that turned the entire case on its head. One afternoon, she called me into her office, looking more energized than I'd ever seen her. "Evie, you're not going to believe this," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. Inside was a series of documents, emails, bank statements, and even a recorded phone call. The joint account had been opened years ago when I first started my business. My dad had offered to help me manage the paperwork, and I naively trusted him with access. I'd forgotten about the account entirely once Nathan and I set up dedicated business accounts, assuming it had been closed. Victoria explained that while the account was technically shared, using it for personal expenses without my knowledge or consent could still be considered fraud under state law. "They were planning this for months," Victoria explained. "Your parents, Mark and Jess. They've been plotting to sue you since they found out how much your business is worth." I stared at the folder, my hands shaking. "Are you serious?" She nodded. "They've been keeping tabs on you, gathering anything they could use against you. But here's the kicker. They explicitly discussed using the lawsuit as leverage to pressure you into a settlement." She played the recording, and there it was. My mother's voice, cold and calculating. "Evelyn won't want the publicity. She'll settle to make this go away. All we have to do is push hard enough." Victoria explained that malicious intent was a critical factor in court dismissals. She outlined how the recorded conversations, combined with the financial documents showing my parents' spending and debts, would prove their case was filed in bad faith. "Judges don't take kindly to people using the legal system as a weapon," she said. "With this evidence, we can show that they weren't seeking genuine support, but trying to extort money through a fabricated claim." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This wasn't just about money, it was a calculated attack. My own family had conspired against me, turning me into their enemy the moment I became successful. Victoria filed a motion to have the case dismissed on the grounds of malicious intent, using the evidence we'd gathered. But before the hearing, I decided to confront my family one last time. I invited them to a meeting at a neutral location, a lawyer's office downtown. When they arrived, Jess looked smug, Mark seemed annoyed, and my parents wouldn't meet my eyes. "I know everything," I said, my voice steady but ice cold. "The second mortgage. The spending. The plan to use this lawsuit to squeeze money out of me. I have the proof, and so does the court." My mother stiffened. "We were just trying to save it," I snapped. "You've done nothing but tear me down my entire life, and now that I've built something for myself, you think you can take it? You're delusional." Mark rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on, Evie. You've got more money than you know what to do with. Helping out your family isn't going to kill you." "Helping?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean funding your lifestyle while you drag my name through the mud?" "No, absolutely not." Jess tried to play the victim. "We're your family, Evie. Don't you care about us?" "No," I said, standing up. "I care about people who care about me. And that's not you." I walked out, leaving them to stew in their defeat. A week later, the judge dismissed their case, citing clear evidence of bad faith. But the damage was done. My relationship with my family was irreparably broken. Not that there was much left to break. In the aftermath, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I'd won, but at what cost? It was hard to accept that my own family would betray me so deeply, but Rachel put it best. "Blood doesn't make family, Evie. Love does." And she was right. It was time to stop chasing the love I'd never get from my parents and siblings, and start cherishing the people who truly had my back. But just when I thought I could finally move on, I discovered one last secret, a betrayal so deep, it made everything else look like child's play. After the lawsuit was dismissed, I thought I'd finally be able to close the chapter on my toxic family and move forward. I was exhausted but determined to focus on my business and the people who actually cared about me. But then the final secret came to light. A betrayal so calculated and cruel, it made everything else pale in comparison. It started with a call from Victoria. "Evie," she said, her voice serious, "I've been going through some additional financial documents tied to your parents. You're going to want to sit down for this." I braced myself, expecting more debt or shady spending. What I wasn't expecting was this. My parents had been siphoning money from me for years. Back when I'd first started my business, I'd opened a small joint savings account with my dad to manage initial expenses. It had seemed practical at the time. He was supposed to help me with the paperwork, and I was too naive to think twice about it. I'd forgotten all about the account once the business took off and I opened new ones. But my dad hadn't. He'd kept the account active, and over the years, both he and my mom had been quietly withdrawing funds whenever they could. The total? Over $100,000. I sat there, stunned, as Victoria explained the trail of transactions she'd uncovered. They used the money for all kinds of things: vacations, renovations, even part of Mark's college fund. It's all documented. The betrayal hit me like a freight train. I'd worked so hard to build something out of nothing, and they'd been stealing from me the whole time. And the worst part? They hadn't even needed it. This wasn't about survival. It was about greed, fueled by a mix of rage and heartbreak. I decided I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I filed a police report and pressed charges for fraud and theft. It wasn't an easy decision. I knew it would make me the pariah of my already broken family, but at this point, I had nothing left to lose. The fallout was swift and brutal. My parents were served with legal papers, and the news spread quickly through our hometown. Mark and Jess were furious, accusing me of destroying the family and calling me every name in the book. My parents, predictably, tried to play the victims, claiming they'd only taken the money to help the family and had always planned to pay it back. But the evidence was irrefutable. The case didn't take long to settle. My parents were ordered to pay back every cent they'd stolen, plus interest, though I doubted they'd ever be able to. The judge also imposed a hefty fine for their actions, which left them in an even deeper financial hole. It wasn't about the money for me. It was about justice. For the first time in my life, I felt like I'd stood up for myself and won. In the months that followed, I cut ties with my family completely. I changed my phone number, locked down my social media, and moved into a new apartment with heightened security. Rachel and Nathan became my rocks, supporting me through the emotional aftermath and reminding me that I wasn't alone. Victoria, too, became more than just a lawyer. She became a friend, someone who truly had my back when it mattered most. But the story doesn't end there. Just when I thought the worst was behind me, I received an anonymous tip. An envelope slipped under the door of my office. Inside was a series of documents that revealed something I never saw coming. My parents had forged my name on the mortgage for their house. I stared at the papers, my heart pounding. They dragged me into their financial mess even deeper than I realized. The mortgage was in default, and technically, I was on the hook for it. This was their endgame all along. If they couldn't guilt me into giving them money outright, they'd use my name and credit to save themselves. I handed the documents over to Victoria immediately. She assured me I had a strong case for fraud, but it was still a nightmare to unravel. Victoria immediately began investigating the documents. She confirmed that my parents had used copies of my old signatures from business paperwork to forge my name on the mortgage application. Handwriting analysis proved that I hadn't signed the documents myself, and bank records showed the mortgage payments were being withdrawn from my parents' accounts, not mine. Victoria assured me that this evidence would be more than enough to prove my case in court. The legal battle took months, and while I ultimately cleared my name and removed myself from the mortgage, the ordeal left me drained. By the time everything was resolved, I was done. Completely and utterly done. I'd given my family every chance to redeem themselves, and they'd only used it to dig the knife deeper. I realized then that I couldn't change them, but I could change how much power they had over me. So, I let them go. Completely. I found solace in my chosen family, the people who stood by me through it all. Rachel and I took a much-needed trip to Maui to decompress, where we spent our days sipping cocktails on the beach and laughing about how far we'd come since our days at the diner. Nathan and I continued to grow the business, eventually expanding to new cities and cementing our reputation as one of the best event planning firms in the region. And Victoria? She became my go-to for all things legal and personal, a constant reminder that not everyone in the world was out to take advantage of me. As for my parents, Mark and Jess, they faded into the background of my life, reduced to distant memories and cautionary tales. Last I heard, they'd sold the house and moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. Mark's marriage was on the rocks, and Jess was still chasing dreams she'd never reach. I felt no pity for them, only relief that I was finally free. Looking back, I realize now that being the black sheep of the family wasn't a curse. It was a gift. It forced me to carve my own path, to find strength and resilience I didn't know I had. And while the road wasn't easy, it led me to a life I'm proud of, a life I built on my own terms, surrounded by people who truly care about me. Blood doesn't make a family. Love, trust, and loyalty do. And I finally found mine.